June 19, 1944, 30,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu pushes his F6F Hellcat into a steep dive, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine roaring at full power. Below him, a formation of Japanese dive bombers approaches the American carrier fleet, the same carriers his ship, USS Lexington, is sworn to protect. In the next 18 minutes, Vrasiu will shoot down 6 enemy aircraft. Around him, 450 Hellcats are doing the same, turning the sky into a graveyard for Japanese naval aviation. This single day will break the back of Japan's carrier air power forever. And it all happened because of one aircraft, the plane that turned the tide of the Pacific War. 2.5 years earlier, the situation was very different. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor burns. The USS Arizona rests on the harbor bottom. 2,403 Americans are dead. The Imperial Japanese Navy has demonstrated a level of naval air power that shocks the world. Their carrier strike force, built around the legendary Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter, has achieved what many thought impossible: a devastating surprise attack that cripples the U.S. Pacific Fleet in a single morning. But Pearl Harbor was just the beginning. In the months that followed, Japanese Zeros dominated every engagement. The Philippines fell. Wake Island fell. Singapore fell. The British battleship Prince of Wales and the battle cruiser Repulse were sunk by Japanese aircraft. American fighters, the F4F Wildcat, the P-40 Warhawk, the P-39 Airacobra, were outclassed. The Zero could outmaneuver them, outclimb them, and had longer range. Japanese pilots, veterans of years fighting in China, were among the most experienced naval aviators in the world. By mid-1942, the strategic situation in the Pacific was desperate. American carrier forces had won critical victories at Coral Sea and Midway, but these successes came at tremendous cost. The carriers USS Lexington, Yorktown, Wasp, and Hornet were all sunk within months. American pilots were dying in aircraft that couldn't match the Zero's performance. The kill ratio was barely favorable, and that was only because American pilots were learning brutal tactics. Never dogfight with a Zero, use altitude and speed, hit and run. The U.S. Navy needed a new fighter, desperately. Not an incremental improvement, but a revolutionary aircraft that could dominate the Zero the way the Zero dominated everything else. A fighter that could protect the carriers, escort the bombers, and sweep Japanese aircraft from the sky. A fighter that could turn the tide. The problem was immense. The Zero's advantages were well documented. It could turn inside any American fighter, its climb rate was exceptional, and its range allowed operations far from carriers. Japanese tactics emphasized maneuverability and dogfighting skill. Their pilots had spent years perfecting these techniques. American aircraft designers faced a fundamental choice: try to beat the Zero at its own game by building a more maneuverable fighter, or develop a different approach entirely. The first path seemed impossible. The Zero achieved its performance through extreme weight reduction, sacrificing pilot protection and fuel tank armor. American military doctrine wouldn't accept those compromises. American pilots needed armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and heavy armament. But all of that meant weight, which meant reduced maneuverability. Here's where things get interesting. While other companies struggled with this seemingly impossible equation, one aircraft manufacturer had a different idea. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, based in Bethpage, Long Island, had been building carrier aircraft since the 1930s. They'd developed the F4F Wildcat, which, while outclassed by the Zero in raw performance, had proven surprisingly survivable due to its rugged construction. Roy Grumman, the company's founder, understood something crucial. You don't beat the Zero by becoming the Zero. You beat it by building something the Zero can't survive fighting. More powerful engine, heavier armament, better armor, superior diving speed, and most critically, enough performance to dictate the terms of engagement, to force the Zero to fight the American way, not the Japanese way. But here's the challenge. All of this had to fit on an aircraft carrier. Weight, size, and strength requirements for carrier operations were far more demanding than land-based fighters. The aircraft needed strong landing gear to handle carrier landings, folding wings to fit on elevators and in hangars, enough structural strength to survive catapult launches and arrested landings, and it needed to be simple enough for rapid production and field maintenance. In early 1942, as American forces were still reeling from Japanese victories across the Pacific, Grumman began design work on what would become the F6F Hellcat. The program was marked urgent priority. The Navy needed this fighter operational within 18 months, an incredibly compressed timeline for aircraft development. Every day of delay meant more American pilots dying in inferior aircraft. Every week without a Zero killer meant Japanese dominance continued. The stakes were existential. If American carrier forces couldn't achieve air superiority, the island-hopping campaign to retake the Pacific would be impossible. Amphibious landings required air cover. Supply lines required protection. Without a dominant carrier fighter, the entire American strategy for defeating Japan would collapse. The pressure on Grumman was immense. They had 18 months to design, test, and deliver a fighter that could reverse Japanese air superiority. 18 months to create an aircraft that pilots would trust with their lives. 18 months to build the plane that would turn the tide. And if you're a fan of WW2 aviation history, hit that subscribe button. We're covering every legendary aircraft from the greatest conflict in history. And trust me, the Hellcat story is one you won't want to miss. Now, to understand how the Hellcat came to be, we need to go back to 1942 and understand exactly what problem Grumman was trying to solve. To understand the F6F Hellcat, we need to go back to early 1942, a time when American naval aviation was fighting for survival against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The Mitsubishi A6M0 had revolutionized naval air combat. Introduced in 1940, it possessed performance characteristics that shocked Western observers. At 6,164 pounds loaded weight, it was remarkably light. Its Nakajima Saki radial engine produced only 1,130 horsepower, yet the Zero could reach 331 mph, climb at 3,100 feet per minute, and maintain a service ceiling of 33,000 feet. Most impressively, its range exceeded 1,600 miles with drop tanks, unheard of for a carrier fighter. The Zero achieved this through radical weight reduction. No armor plating for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks, lightweight construction throughout. The result was an aircraft that could outmaneuver anything America fielded. Japanese pilots exploited this advantage ruthlessly, engaging American fighters in turning dogfights where the Zero's superior maneuverability proved decisive. American fighter pilots quickly learned that dogfighting with a Zero was suicide. The Grumman F4F Wildcat, the Navy's primary carrier fighter in early 1942, was hopelessly outclassed in a turning fight. At 7,952 pounds, it was nearly 2,000 pounds heavier than the Zero. Its top speed was only 318 mph, slower than the Zero. Its climb rate was inferior. Its maneuverability was no contest. But here's what American pilots discovered. The Wildcat had advantages. It could dive faster due to its heavier weight and more robust construction. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns packed more punch than the Zero's 220 cannons and two 7.7 machine guns. Most importantly, it could survive damage that would destroy a Zero. The armor plate behind the pilot's seat, the self-sealing fuel tanks, the rugged construction, these kept pilots alive. Lieutenant Commander John "Jimmy" Thatch developed tactics that exploited these advantages. The Thatch weave used pairs of fighters in mutual support, scissoring back and forth to cover each other. When a Zero attacked one Wildcat, the other would be positioned to attack the Zero. It was defensive, reactive, and absolutely necessary for survival. But defensive tactics weren't enough. The United States needed to go on the offensive. The island-hopping campaign that would carry American forces across the Pacific required air superiority. Amphibious assaults demanded carrier aircraft that could suppress enemy air forces, destroy ground targets, and protect landing forces. You couldn't do that from a defensive posture. The strategic situation was becoming critical. By mid-1942, America had lost 4 fleet carriers: Lexington at Coral Sea, Yorktown at Midway, Wasp near Guadalcanal, and Hornet during the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. The remaining carriers, Enterprise, Saratoga, and the newly commissioned ships, couldn't afford to lose any more. Each carrier loss meant losing experienced pilots, trained crews, and irreplaceable combat capability. The replacement carriers being built would be larger, more capable ships. The Essex-class carriers would be the backbone of the Pacific Fleet, but they wouldn't start commissioning until late 1943. These new carriers deserved a fighter worthy of them, not the barely adequate Wildcat, but something that could dominate the air. The problem wasn't just performance. American fighters needed range to escort bombers on long-distance strikes. They needed the firepower to destroy enemy bombers quickly before they could attack carriers. They needed durability to survive ground fire during strafing attacks. They needed reliability because mechanical failures over the ocean meant death. And they needed to be simple enough that young pilots fresh from training could fly them effectively. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. The F4F Wildcat had taught important lessons. Grumman's design philosophy of rugged construction had saved countless pilots. But the Wildcat was fundamentally a 1930s design. There were limits to how much it could be improved. The Navy tried. The FM2 variant would eventually address some issues, but it was still too slow, too lightly armed, and too limited in capability. Several other fighters were in development or service, but all had problems. The Vought F4U Corsair, with its distinctive inverted gull wing and powerful R2800 engine, showed promise. It was fast, over 400 mph, and heavily armed. But it had severe problems operating from carriers. The long nose created visibility issues during landing. It had a tendency to stall unpredictably. The Navy was so concerned about carrier operations that they initially relegated the Corsair to land-based Marine squadrons. The Corsair's troubles highlighted a crucial reality. Carrier operations imposed unique demands. A land-based fighter could be temperamental, difficult to land, or require a long runway. A carrier fighter had to be forgiving, predictable, and capable of landing on a 500-foot deck while the ship pitched and rolled in ocean swells. Young pilots with limited experience needed to be able to operate it safely. Ground crews had to maintain it in cramped, salt-air conditions with limited tools and parts. The Navy's requirements for a new fighter were specific and demanding. Top speed of at least 375 mph, service ceiling of 35,000 feet or higher, 6.50 caliber machine guns minimum, range of 1,000 plus miles with external tanks, strong enough for carrier operations, simple enough for rapid production, and it needed to be combat-ready by mid-1943, 18 months from program start. Time was the enemy as much as the Japanese. Every month of development meant more pilots dying in inadequate aircraft. Every delay meant more Japanese victories, more American carriers at risk. The pressure to deliver was immense, but delivering a flawed aircraft would be worse. The Navy needed this right the first time. But the solution would come from an unexpected source. A company that understood that winning against the Zero required forgetting everything about traditional fighter design and starting fresh. Enter Grumman, a practical engineer who believed that the best fighter was the one that brought pilots home alive. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation had built its reputation on rugged, reliable carrier aircraft. Their design philosophy was simple: make it strong, make it work, make it survivable. While other companies chased performance through lightweight construction, Grumman built tough aircraft that could absorb punishment and keep flying. In early 1942, the Navy approached Grumman with urgent requirements for a new carrier fighter. The specifications were daunting: outperform the Zero in speed and climb, match its range, carry heavier armament, and do it all while maintaining Grumman's legendary durability. Chief designer William Schwendler assembled his team with one directive: we have 18 months. The starting point was the F4F Wildcats lessons. Pilots loved its toughness, but needed more power, more speed, more firepower. Schwendler's team centered the design around the most powerful engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, the same 2,000 horsepower powerplant being developed for the troubled Corsair. But here's where Grumman's approach differed dramatically from Vaught's Corsair design. Instead of pursuing maximum performance through complex aerodynamics, Grumman prioritized simplicity and carrier suitability. The wing was mounted low on the fuselage for easy folding and strong landing gear attachment. The cockpit was positioned high, giving pilots excellent visibility for carrier landings, the exact opposite of the Corsair's problematic long nose. The fuselage was wide and robust, providing internal volume for armor, ammunition, and fuel tanks. The landing gear was incredibly strong, designed to handle the brutal stress of carrier landings at full combat weight. Where the Corsair used complex hydraulics, the Hellcat used simpler systems that could be maintained by carrier mechanics with basic tools. Armament was straightforward: 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings, 3 per side with 400 rounds per gun. Later variants would add provisions for rockets and bombs, but the initial design focused on air-to-air combat. The guns were positioned to converge at 1,000 feet, close enough for decisive hits, far enough to avoid debris from exploding targets. The prototype, designated XF6F1, was designed and built in astonishing time. Construction began in September 1941, before Pearl Harbor. The first airframe was completed by June 1942, just 9 months later. But Grumman made a crucial decision. They wouldn't fly the prototype immediately. Combat reports from the Pacific were coming in daily. Pilots were reporting the Zero's exact capabilities, its tactics, its weaknesses. Grumman engineers studied every detail. They learned that while the Zero could turn, it couldn't dive as fast as American fighters. Its lightweight construction made it vulnerable to heavy firepower. Its lack of armor meant .50 caliber hits were often fatal. These reports prompted rapid design changes. The engine was upgraded to the more powerful R2810, producing 2,000 horsepower. The wing area was increased slightly for better low-speed handling. Additional armor was added around the cockpit and oil cooler. The cowling was redesigned for better engine cooling and reduced drag. On June 26, 1942, test pilot Robert Hall took the XF6F3, the redesignated prototype, into the air for the first time. The 30-minute flight revealed an aircraft that exceeded expectations. It was fast. Preliminary tests suggested over 370 mph. It climbed well, reaching 10,000 feet in under 5 minutes. Most importantly, it handled predictably, with no nasty surprises during takeoff, flight, or landing. Navy pilots who flew evaluation missions were enthusiastic. The Hellcat felt stable, forgiving, and powerful. It didn't have the Corsair's speed, but it was fast enough. It didn't turn like a Zero, but it could dictate engagements through superior speed and diving ability. Most importantly, it was easy to fly and land on carriers, exactly what the Navy needed. The Navy didn't wait for complete testing. In October 1942, they ordered 1,080 F6F3 Hellcats straight into production. The risk was enormous, ordering mass production before finishing evaluation, but the need was desperate. However, what happened during the first test flight would shock everyone involved, not because something went wrong, but because everything went right. The first production F6F3 Hellcat rolled off Grumman's assembly line at Bethpage, Long Island, on October 3, 1942, just 4 months after the prototype's first flight. This was unprecedented speed for aircraft production, driven by desperate urgency in the Pacific. But speed meant risk. The Navy was committing to mass production of an aircraft that had barely been tested. Any fundamental flaw would be replicated across hundreds of fighters, wasting critical resources and potentially costing pilots' lives. The pressure on Grumman's test pilots was immense. Find problems now, before the fleet received aircraft that could kill the men flying them. Robert Hall and other test pilots pushed the Hellcat to its limits throughout late 1942. They tested high-speed dives, exploring the compressibility issues that plagued high-performance aircraft. They executed violent maneuvers, stressing the airframe to verify structural strength. They simulated carrier landings thousands of times, refining the approach characteristics and hook design. The results were remarkable. The Hellcat proved extraordinarily forgiving. Unlike the Corsair, which could stall unpredictably during carrier approaches, the Hellcat gave pilots clear warning before stalling. The controls remained responsive throughout the landing pattern. The wide-track landing gear provided stability during touchdown. Even when pilots made mistakes, the aircraft was forgiving enough to prevent disasters. Minor problems emerged, as expected. The engine cooling system required modifications to prevent overheating in tropical climates. The gun sight needed adjustment for better accuracy. The radio equipment was relocated for improved maintenance access. Each issue was quickly addressed in the production line, with retrofits sent to aircraft already delivered. But here's where things took a dramatic turn. Actual combat intelligence from the Pacific forced more significant changes. In April 1943, American forces shot down a Zero and recovered it nearly intact. The aircraft was repaired, test flown by American pilots, and evaluated exhaustively. This intelligence goldmine revealed the Zero's exact performance envelope, its handling characteristics, and its weaknesses. The data was immediately sent to Grumman. Engineers discovered that while the Hellcat already had superior diving speed and firepower, tactical maneuvering could be improved. They modified the aileron design to increase roll rate, allowing pilots to reverse direction faster during combat. This seemingly small change had enormous tactical implications. A Hellcat could now roll into a dive, escape, then roll back into an attack position before the Zero could respond. Meanwhile, pilot training was evolving rapidly. The Navy established specialized fighter training programs where experienced combat pilots taught new aviators how to fight the Zero. The doctrine was clear. Never dogfight, use speed and altitude, attack from above, dive away if threatened. The Hellcat was designed around these tactics. Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient, helped develop Hellcat combat tactics. He emphasized the aircraft's strengths. You can't turn with a Zero, but you don't need to. Climb above him, dive on him at high speed, fire a burst, and extend away using your superior speed. He can't catch you, and if he tries to follow you down, you'll outrun him. Then climb back up and repeat. The first operational squadron, VF, received their Hellcats in early 1943. Squadron pilots transitioned from Wildcats and were immediately impressed. One pilot reported, "The Hellcat feels twice as powerful as the Wildcat. You advance the throttle and the acceleration pins you back in your seat. It climbs like it wants to leave the atmosphere. But best of all, it's easy to fly. You don't have to fight the aircraft, you can focus on fighting the enemy." Production ramped up rapidly. Grumman's Bethpage plant worked 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the line every hour. Workers, many of them women who'd never worked in factories before the war, assembled complex aircraft with remarkable quality. The Grumman Iron Works was living up to its reputation. Quality control was obsessive. Every aircraft was test-flown before delivery. Any defect, no matter how minor, was corrected immediately. The Navy couldn't afford unreliable aircraft. Mechanical failures over the Pacific Ocean meant death. Grumman understood this, and their quality standards reflected it. By summer 1943, hundreds of Hellcats were ready for combat deployment. Pilots were trained. Tactics were refined. The aircraft had proven itself in testing. Now came the ultimate test, actual combat against the Zero and the veteran Japanese pilots who dominated Pacific skies for 2 years. The Navy selected the USS Essex and USS Yorktown, the new carrier named to honor the one lost at Midway, to introduce the Hellcat to combat. VF-5 and VF-9 would be the first squadrons to face the enemy. The date was set, late August 1943. The location, Marcus Island, a Japanese-held atoll 1,000 miles from Tokyo. The pilots understood what was at stake. If the Hellcat failed, if Japanese Zeros proved superior despite all the engineering and testing, the entire Pacific strategy would need rethinking. But if the Hellcat succeeded, if it could dominate the Zero the way intelligence and testing suggested, the tide of the war would shift. Squadron commanders briefed their pilots, "Stick to the tactics, use your advantages, don't try to dogfight. Trust the aircraft, trust your training. The Hellcat is faster, tougher, and more heavily armed. Use those strengths." But its real test was about to come in actual combat, and what happened in those first engagements would shock both American and Japanese forces. August 31, 1943, 150 miles north of Marcus Island. Lieutenant Commander Edward Owen led VF-9 from USS Essex on the F6F Hellcats' first combat mission, a strike against one of Japan's most heavily defended outposts. The mission briefed was straightforward: escort bombing aircraft to Marcus Island, suppress Japanese fighters, return to the carrier. Simple in concept, but everyone understood the weight of this moment. 2 years of defeats, of pilots dying in inferior aircraft, of watching Zeros dominate American fighters, all of that would be tested in the next hour. 25 Hellcats launched from Essex and Yorktown, forming up over the carriers before turning toward the target. The pilots were tense. Most had flown Wildcats and knew what fighting Zeros meant: constant vigilance, defensive tactics, hoping to survive until you could disengage. But the briefings promised the Hellcat was different. At 800 hours, the formation approached Marcus Island. The radio crackled. Bandits 11 o'clock high, Zeros intercepting. 12 Mitsubishi Zeros dove toward the American formation. Japanese pilots, expecting the familiar Wildcats, attacked aggressively. They'd done this dozens of times before: dive through the escorts, scatter them with superior maneuverability, then attack the vulnerable bombers. But here's where things took a dramatic turn. The Hellcats didn't scatter. Lieutenant Commander Owen's voice came over the radio: "Maintain formation, prepare to engage." The Zeros closed rapidly, their pilots confident. Then the Hellcats attacked. Lieutenant Junior Grade, Eugene Valencia got the first kill. A Zero pulled up in front of him, attempting a climbing turn that would have left a Wildcat behind. Valencia simply followed, the Hellcat's powerful engine pulling him up effortlessly. At 1,000 feet range, he pressed the trigger. 6.50 caliber guns erupted. The Zero's lightweight construction offered no protection. The aircraft disintegrated under the onslaught, pieces tumbling toward the ocean. Around him, other Hellcats were engaging. The Japanese pilots quickly realized these weren't Wildcats. The American fighters were faster, climbed better, and hit harder. Zeros that tried to escape in dives found the Hellcats staying with them, even pulling ahead. Those that tried to dogfight discovered that while they could outturn the Hellcats, they couldn't escape the superior American speed and firepower. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, VF-9 had shot down 4 Zeros confirmed, with 3 more probables. Not a single Hellcat was lost. Several had taken hits, but the rugged construction and armor kept pilots safe. The bombers completed their mission unmolested. The pilots' debriefs were enthusiastic. Lieutenant Valencia reported, "The Hellcat does everything they promised. I could keep up with the Zero in a climb, stay with him in a dive, and my guns just tore him apart. I never felt outmatched for a second." Over the next weeks, Hellcat squadrons flew dozens more missions. The results were consistent, American fighters dominating Japanese opposition. September 18, during a raid on Tarawa, VF-5 from Yorktown destroyed 8 Zeros without loss. October 5, VF-6 shot down 11 Japanese aircraft over Wake Island, again without losing a single Hellcat. The kill ratio was extraordinary. In the first 3 months of combat operations, Hellcats destroyed over 100 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 10 to enemy action. The ratio was approximately 10:1, unprecedented in naval aviation. Japanese pilots began reporting encounters with a new American fighter, larger and more powerful than before. Intelligence reports noted American fighters attacking aggressively rather than defensively. Japanese commanders realized something had changed fundamentally. American pilots' confidence soared. For 2 years, they'd fought knowing they were outclassed. Now they entered combat knowing they had the superior aircraft. The psychological impact was enormous. Pilots flew more aggressively, took calculated risks, and pressed attacks knowing their aircraft could handle the punishment. The Navy expanded Hellcat deployment rapidly. Every new Essex-class carrier received Hellcat squadrons. By early 1944, the F6F was the primary carrier fighter, replacing Wildcats across the fleet. Production increased to meet demand. Grumman couldn't build them fast enough. But these early successes were just the beginning. The real test would come in 1944, when American carrier forces would face the rebuilt Japanese carrier fleet in the largest carrier battle in history. This was just the beginning. What came next would cement its legendary status and prove that one aircraft really could turn the tide of war. By June 1944, the F6F Hellcat was at the height of its power and about to face the decisive test that would determine the fate of the Pacific War. The strategic situation had transformed dramatically since the Hellcat's introduction. American forces had captured the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. The island-hopping campaign was advancing steadily toward Japan. But the next objective, the Mariana Islands, would bring American forces within bomber range of the Japanese home islands. Japan couldn't allow that. The Imperial Japanese Navy committed its rebuilt carrier fleet to stop the American advance. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded 9 carriers with 450 aircraft. His pilots were less experienced than the veterans lost at Midway and in the Solomons campaign, but they were determined and numerous. Japanese strategy relied on land-based aircraft from Guam and other islands supporting the carrier strike, creating numerical superiority. Opposing them, Admiral Mark Mitcher commanded Task Force 58, 15 carriers carrying over 900 aircraft, nearly 500 of them F6F Hellcats. The stage was set for the largest carrier battle in history, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. June 19, 1944. Dawn broke over the Philippine Sea with American radar detecting massive Japanese raids inbound. At 1,000 hours, the first wave of 69 Japanese aircraft approached the American fleet. Commander David McCampbell, leading VF-15 from USS Essex, received the radio call. Vector 265, Angels 25, large bogey inbound. McCampbell's Hellcats climbed to intercept. At 25,000 feet, they spotted the Japanese formation, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and Zero escorts. "Tally-ho, engaging," McCampbell transmitted, then rolled into his attack. What happened next would be called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Hellcats tore through the Japanese formation like a scythe through wheat. McCampbell personally shot down 7 aircraft that day, but he was just one of hundreds of American pilots inflicting catastrophic losses. The superior speed, firepower, and pilot training combined with effective radar direction created a massacre. The first Japanese raid lost 42 aircraft before reaching the American fleet. Only a handful of bombs hit American ships, causing minimal damage. 3 more Japanese raids followed throughout the day. Each met the same fate. Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu, flying from USS Lexington, destroyed 6 dive bombers in 8 minutes. His gun camera footage shows methodical destruction. Approach from behind and above, fire a burst into the engine and fuel tanks, watch the aircraft explode, move to the next target. Repeat. By day's end, the Japanese had launched 4 major raids totaling over 370 aircraft. American Hellcats and anti-aircraft fire destroyed approximately 330 of them. The Americans lost 29 aircraft, mostly to operational accidents and anti-aircraft friendly fire. The exchange ratio was staggering, over 11, 1 in favor of the Americans. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. The Hellcat pilots weren't just shooting down aircraft, they were destroying Japan's naval air power irreplaceably. Lieutenant Junior Grade George Duncan of VF-2 described the combat. "They came at us in formations, organized, trying to execute coordinated attacks. But we had radar vectors putting us in perfect intercept positions. We had altitude advantage. Our Hellcats were faster, so we controlled the engagement completely. We dived through their formations, fire bursts that destroyed aircraft instantly, then climbed back up using our engine power. They couldn't touch us." The statistics tell the story. On June 19, VF-15 destroyed 68 Japanese aircraft. VF-16 claimed 67. VF-2 destroyed 57. Across the entire task force, Hellcat pilots claimed over 300 victories in a single day. While some claims were duplicates, multiple pilots attacking the same aircraft, even conservative analysis confirms over 250 Japanese aircraft destroyed. But here's what made this victory decisive. Those weren't just aircraft losses. Each one represented a pilot, often an irreplaceable experienced aviator, but more commonly a barely trained replacement. Japan's pilot training program couldn't produce skilled naval aviators at the rate they were being lost. The experienced pilots who dominated in 1942 were mostly dead. Their replacements had perhaps 100 hours of flight time before being sent to combat. American pilots averaged over 300 hours. The next day, June 20, American carriers launched a long-range strike against the retreating Japanese fleet. The Hellcats escorted bombers over 300 miles, a distance that would have been impossible for Wildcats. They destroyed more Japanese fighters over their own carriers, then provided cover while American bombers sank the carrier Hio and damaged several others. The Battle of the Philippine Sea broke Japanese naval aviation permanently. They'd lost approximately 600 aircraft and 500 irreplaceable pilots in 2 days. The carriers that survived had almost no aircraft or pilots remaining. Japan would never again launch a major carrier offensive. Individual Hellcat pilots achieved extraordinary success during this period. Commander David McCampbell ended the war with 34 confirmed victories, making him the Navy's top ace. Lieutenant Cecil Harris achieved 24 victories, all in Hellcats. Dozens of pilots became aces, needing only 5 kills for the designation, but many exceeding 10 or 15. The tactical advantages were clear. The Hellcat's speed allowed pilots to control engagement timing. Its durability meant pilots survived mistakes and battle damage. Its firepower destroyed targets reliably with short bursts. Its range enabled operations far from carriers, and its ease of handling meant even average pilots could fly it effectively. Ground crews loved it too. The Hellcat was remarkably reliable. The R-2800 engine proved robust in harsh maritime conditions. Maintenance was straightforward. Mechanics could change an engine in under 2 hours using carrier equipment. The wide-track landing gear reduced landing accidents. The simple hydraulic systems rarely failed. By late 1944, the Hellcat's dominance was absolute. Japanese pilots knew engaging Hellcats meant probable death. Some refused to attack when they identified the distinctive shape. Others tried desperately to escape, diving toward clouds or the deck, hoping the Americans wouldn't follow. But every legend has its darkest moment, and even the dominant Hellcat faced challenges that tested its pilots and limitations that couldn't be overcome through firepower alone. Despite its success, the F6F Hellcat wasn't invincible, and by late 1944, its limitations were becoming apparent in ways that cost lives. The most persistent problem was weight. At 12,500 pounds combat-loaded, the Hellcat was nearly twice as heavy as the Zero. While this weight provided armor, firepower, and durability, it limited maneuverability. Experienced Japanese pilots who survived encounters learned to exploit this. Draw the Hellcat into slow-speed turning fights where weight became a disadvantage. American doctrine prohibited such engagements, but in the chaos of combat, pilots didn't always have choices. Lieutenant James Swope learned this lesson fatally on November 14, 1944, during strikes against Manila. His Hellcat was jumped by 3 Zeros at low altitude after a strafing run. Unable to gain speed or altitude, he attempted to turn with them. The Zeros, despite their pilots being less experienced than 1942 veterans, could still outturn a Hellcat. Swope's aircraft took cannon fire and crashed into Manila Bay. His body was never recovered. The kamikaze threat exposed another vulnerability. Starting in October 1944, Japanese pilots began deliberate suicide attacks against American ships. Hellcats intercepted many kamikazes, but the nature of the threat was different. A Zero pilot trying to survive would break off when damaged. A kamikaze pilot would continue even with catastrophic damage, requiring complete destruction of the aircraft. Several kamikazes reached American ships despite being hit by Hellcat fire, their dying momentum carrying them into targets. Engine reliability, while generally excellent, had limits. The R-2800 was powerful but complex. In the corrosive salt-air environment of Pacific operations, maintenance was constant. Spark plugs fouled, fuel lines corroded, oil leaks developed. Carrier mechanics worked miracles keeping them running, but some aircraft launched with engines that failed during missions. Over water, hundreds of miles from the carrier, engine failure meant death, unless rescue submarines could reach the downed pilot. The cockpit design, while praised for carrier landing visibility, created problems in tropical heat. The enclosed canopy turned the cockpit into an oven on the deck. Pilots waiting to launch often suffered heat exhaustion. Their effectiveness degraded before missions even began. Some squadrons modified canopies to improve ventilation, but this reduced structural strength. Ground attack missions revealed another limitation. While the Hellcat could carry bombs and rockets, it wasn't optimized for the ground attack role. The armor protecting pilots from aerial combat didn't protect adequately from ground fire. Anti-aircraft guns firing from below could penetrate the belly armor. Several pilots were killed by ground fire during strafing attacks on Japanese airfields. Losses to operational accidents exceeded combat losses in some periods. Carrier landings at night in bad weather or after long missions were dangerous. Pilots exhausted from hours of flight made mistakes. The Hellcat was forgiving, but it couldn't prevent all accidents. Pilots missed arrestor wires and went into the barriers or over the side. Some crashed on approach, their aircraft lost in the dark ocean. The Japanese also adapted tactically. By 1945, surviving Japanese pilots avoided combat when possible, husbanding their strength for kamikaze attacks or homeland defense. This made Hellcat sweeps less effective. You couldn't shoot down fighters that refused to engage. When Japanese aircraft did fight, they often did so near their own airfields where anti-aircraft fire threatened American fighters as much as the enemy. Night operations exposed the standard F6F-3's inadequacy. Japanese bombers attacked American task forces at night when Hellcats couldn't effectively intercept them. The Navy rushed the F6F-5N night fighter variant into service, but it came too late for many operations. Several carriers were damaged by night attacks that day fighters couldn't prevent. Perhaps the most significant limitation was one of timing. The Hellcat arrived when it did through urgency and luck. Had development taken 6 months longer, had the Battle of Midway gone differently, Japan might have achieved decisive advantages that even the Hellcat couldn't reverse. Yet one mission would prove why this aircraft earned its place in history, demonstrating that despite its limitations, the Hellcat was the right aircraft at the right time. October 24, 1944. The Philippine Sea dawn. Commander David McCampbell sat in his F6F Hellcat on the deck of USS Essex, watching the largest Japanese naval force since Midway approach from the west. This was it, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Japan's final desperate gamble to destroy American invasion forces in the Philippines. The mission briefing had been stark. Japanese Admiral Kurita commanded a powerful surface fleet including the super battleship Yamato. If these ships reached the invasion beaches at Leyte Gulf, they would massacre the vulnerable transports and destroy MacArthur's entire landing force. The only thing standing between Kurita's battleships and disaster was American carrier air power, and most of those carriers' fighters were F6F Hellcats. At 8:30 hours, McCampbell launched with 7 other Hellcats from Air Group 15. Their mission: find and attack the Japanese fleet, then intercept any enemy aircraft threatening the American carriers. As they flew west, McCampbell's radar intercept officer radioed, "Contact! Massive bogey bearing 315, distance 40 miles, looks like 60-plus aircraft." McCampbell's 8 Hellcats were facing a Japanese strike force of over 60 aircraft, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and 0 escorts. The odds were absurd. 8 fighters couldn't stop 60 attackers, but McCampbell knew something the Japanese didn't. His Hellcats weren't alone. Other American fighters were vectoring toward the threat. His job was to slow the Japanese formation down, disrupt their attack coordination, and buy time for reinforcements. "Let's go to work," McCampbell transmitted calmly. "Remember your training, pick targets, fire short bursts, break off, and re-attack. Let's make every shot count." The Hellcats dove from altitude, McCampbell selecting the lead Japanese aircraft as his first target. At 1,000 feet range, he pressed the trigger. 6.50 caliber guns converged their fire on a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber. The aircraft exploded immediately, pieces tumbling toward the ocean. McCampbell didn't watch it fall. He was already lining up his second target. For the next 90 minutes, McCampbell and his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, conducted a masterclass in fighter tactics. They'd attack from above, destroy 1 or 2 aircraft, then climb away using the Hellcat's superior speed and power. The Japanese formation tried to maintain cohesion, but every few minutes another aircraft would explode or fall away burning. McCampbell's ammunition counter showed rounds depleting steadily. He'd started with 2,400 rounds total across 6 guns. Each burst consumed 5,100 rounds. He had to make every shot count. His 9th kill came at 1,000 hours, another dive bomber that disintegrated under his fire. His 10th kill followed 2 minutes later. 11, 12. By 10:30 hours, McCampbell had destroyed 9 aircraft personally. His wingman Rushing had shot down 6. Together, just 2 Hellcats had destroyed 15 enemy aircraft and damaged several more. The Japanese formation's coordination was shattered. Bombers scattered, seeking safety in clouds. Zeros broke off to engage the Americans but couldn't catch the faster Hellcats. But here's where things took a dramatic turn. McCampbell's ammunition finally ran out. His guns clicked empty. He radioed Rushing, "Winchester, I'm out of ammo. You?" Rushing confirmed he too was out. They'd fired every round, destroyed 15 aircraft, but the Japanese formation still had 40-plus aircraft heading toward the American carriers. Without ammunition, most pilots would disengage and return to the carrier. McCampbell made a different decision. He'd continue attacking without guns. "Stay with me," he told Rushing. "We're not done yet." For the next 20 minutes, McCampbell and Rushing made repeated mock attacks on the Japanese formation. They dived toward bombers as if attacking, forcing the Japanese pilots to break formation and take evasive action. Without firing a shot, they disrupted bombing runs and wasted precious time. The psychological effect was devastating. Japanese pilots couldn't tell the Hellcats were out of ammunition and reacted as if under actual attack. By the time McCampbell finally disengaged, low on fuel and physically exhausted, the Japanese strike force was scattered and delayed. Other American fighters had arrived and were systematically destroying the remaining attackers. Of the 60-plus aircraft that had threatened the American carriers, fewer than 20 survived to attempt attacks. Only a handful reached targets, causing minor damage. McCampbell landed on Essex with his fuel gauge reading empty. The engine quit as he taxied clear of the arrestor wire. Ground crews counted his gun camera footage. 9 confirmed kills, several probables. Combined with earlier victories that day, McCampbell had destroyed 9 aircraft in a single mission, the Navy's highest single-mission score of the war. But the individual achievement, impressive as it was, mattered less than what it represented. Two Hellcats had held off 60 Japanese aircraft long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The attack that could have devastated the American carrier force had been blunted. The invasion of Leyte proceeded without interference from enemy carriers. Admiral Mitcher sent a message to Air Group 15. Your actions today exemplify what the Hellcat and trained pilots can achieve. You faced overwhelming odds and prevailed through skill, courage, and superior equipment. The Battle of Leyte Gulf continued for 3 more days. Hellcats flew hundreds of sorties, sinking Japanese carriers, defending American ships, and maintaining air superiority. When it ended, Japan's combined fleet was destroyed as an effective fighting force. They'd lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, and countless aircraft. American carrier air power, built around the F6F Hellcat, had proven decisive. As the war progressed, the Hellcat would continue to evolve, adapting to new threats and proving its versatility beyond pure fighter combat. By early 1945, warfare was changing, and the F6F Hellcat evolved to meet threats that hadn't existed when it was designed. The kamikaze menace forced immediate tactical adaptations. Japanese suicide attacks began in October 1944 and intensified through 1945. Unlike conventional attacks where damaged aircraft would break off, kamikazes continued even when hit. This required Hellcat pilots to destroy attackers completely, not just damage them. The solution was to open fire earlier and at longer range, using the Hellcat's heavy ammunition load to ensure catastrophic destruction. Combat air patrols became more intensive. Carriers maintained continuous fighter coverage, with Hellcats orbiting at various altitudes to intercept kamikazes before they could dive on the fleet. This defensive posture was exhausting. Pilots flew 4 or 5 missions daily, each lasting 2 to 3 hours. The Hellcat's reliability proved crucial. Aircraft that required constant maintenance couldn't sustain this operational tempo. The F6F5 variant, introduced in early 1945, incorporated numerous improvements based on combat experience. The engine received minor upgrades, bringing power to 2,200 horsepower. The cowling was redesigned for better cooling. Armor was repositioned to protect against ground fire from below. The windscreen was strengthened after several pilots were injured by bird strikes at high speed. More significantly, the F6F5 could carry a wider variety of ordnance. Underwing racks accommodated 6 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs, each capable of penetrating light armor. Bomb racks allowed up to 2,000 pounds of bombs, 2 1,000-pounders or 4 500-pounders. This transformed the Hellcat into a potent fighter bomber, capable of ground attack missions while retaining air superiority capability. The night fighter variant, F6F5N, became increasingly important. Equipped with APS-6 radar and a pod on the starboard wing, these Hellcats intercepted Japanese night raiders that conventional fighters couldn't see. The radar added weight and drag, reducing speed slightly, but enabled operations in complete darkness. Night fighter pilots required specialized training, learning to fly instruments while interpreting radar returns and executing blind attacks. Lieutenant Commander William Henry described night fighting in the F6F5N. You're flying in total darkness, no moon, no horizon. The radar operator calls out ranges and bearings. You fly toward the target blind until you see engine exhaust, a dim blue flame in the blackness. You close to 500 feet, confirm it's hostile through the flame pattern, then fire. The gun flashes destroy your night vision. You're blind for seconds, hoping you didn't fly into debris. Night Hellcats achieved remarkable success. VF N-41, the first dedicated night fighter squadron, destroyed over 40 Japanese aircraft in night interceptions. Lieutenant Russell Reiserer shot down 8 aircraft at night, all confirmed through radar and gun camera footage. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was significant. Americans could hunt them even in darkness. Ground attack missions expanded throughout 1945. Hellcats struck Japanese airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground before they could be used in kamikaze attacks. They attacked shipping, using bombs and rockets to sink supply vessels. They provided close air support for amphibious invasions, suppressing beach defenses and destroying fortifications. The Battle of Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, saw the Hellcat's versatility tested to its limits. Over 3 months, carrier-based Hellcats flew thousands of sorties. They intercepted over 1,900 kamikaze attacks, shooting down hundreds before they could reach ships. They bombed Japanese positions on Okinawa, supporting Marines and Army troops. They maintained continuous combat air patrols, ensuring no Japanese aircraft penetrated American defenses undetected. But you won't believe what happened during these operations. Despite facing 1,900-plus kamikaze attacks, effective Hellcat combat air patrols kept losses manageable. Many ships were damaged, some sunk, but the toll would have been catastrophic without fighter protection. Post-battle analysis concluded that Hellcats destroyed approximately 60% of attacking kamikazes before they could reach targets. Production reached its peak. Grumman's Bethpage plant, operating 24 hours daily, produced Hellcats at rates exceeding 1 per hour. By war's end, over 12,200 F6F Hellcats had been built, an astounding number for an aircraft introduced less than 3 years earlier. Only the P-51 Mustang exceeded this total among American fighters. Quality remained consistently high despite massive production volumes. Grumman's manufacturing techniques, refined through years of experience, ensured each aircraft met rigorous standards. Defect rates were remarkably low. Pilots trusted their Hellcats because Grumman workers built them right. Different variants served specialized roles. The F6F-3P and F6F-5P reconnaissance variants carried cameras instead of some ammunition, documenting Japanese positions before strikes. The F6F-3K and F6F-5K were drone variants, radio-controlled for use as flying bombs against hardened targets. The F6F-5 and Night Fighter evolved into the F6F-5E with improved radar. Allied forces also operated Hellcats. The British Fleet Air Arm received over 1,200 through Lend-Lease, designating them Gannet before reverting to the American name. British Hellcats served in the Pacific, Indian Ocean, and European theaters. They participated in strikes against the German battleship Tirpitz and Japanese targets in Southeast Asia. By July 1945, the Hellcat equipped nearly every American carrier fighter squadron. Over 60 squadrons operated F6FS, with approximately 1,500 in frontline service at any time. The numbers represented overwhelming American industrial capacity. Japan couldn't match this production even at their peak. Training evolved continuously. New pilots now received over 300 hours of flight time before joining squadrons, including dedicated Hellcat familiarization and tactical training. Gunnery practice emphasized deflection shooting and short burst accuracy. The survivability rate for new pilots improved significantly. Experience and superior equipment combined to reduce losses. The final modifications came in August 1945. Some F6F-5s received equipment for carrying the Tiny Tim rocket, a massive 11.75-inch weapon designed for attacking fortified positions. These would have been used during the planned invasion of Japan. That invasion never came. And then came the moment that would define its legacy, the end of the war and the beginning of the Hellcat's place in history. When the war ended on August 15, 1945, F6F Hellcats were still flying combat missions, still hunting, still dominating right up until the surrender broadcast. The final combat mission occurred on August 15th itself, just hours before Emperor Hirohito's surrender announcement. Hellcats from USS Yorktown intercepted Japanese aircraft over Tokyo, shooting down several before receiving orders to cease fire. Lieutenant Clarence Moore destroyed the last aircraft credited to a Hellcat in combat, a fitting end for the fighter that had dominated the Pacific skies for 2 years. The statistics from those 2 years were staggering and unprecedented in naval aviation history. Total F6F Hellcats built, 12,275 aircraft combat sorties flown, over 66,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, 5,223 in air combat, 209 on the ground total victories, 5,432 confirmed kills Hellcats lost in combat, 270 to enemy aircraft, approximately 200 to ground fire kill ratio. 19-1, the highest of any fighter aircraft in history. These numbers tell a story of complete air superiority. For every Hellcat shot down by enemy fighters, 19 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. No other aircraft in any war before or since has achieved this level of dominance. Individual achievements were equally remarkable. 31 Hellcat pilots became aces in a single day. Over 300 pilots achieved ace status, 5 or more kills, flying Hellcats. Commander David McCampbell finished the war with 34 victories, all in Hellcats, making him the Navy's all-time leading ace. The top 5 Navy aces all flew Hellcats. But here's what makes these achievements truly significant. The Hellcat didn't just win battles. It enabled the entire American strategy in the Pacific. The island-hopping campaign required air superiority for amphibious landings. Carrier task forces needed fighter protection to operate near Japanese-held territory. The strategic bombing of Japan required bases captured through amphibious assaults covered by carrier air power. None of this would have been possible without the Hellcat's dominance. The immediate post-war period saw rapid demobilization. Thousands of Hellcats were declared surplus. Many were pushed over the sides of carriers into the ocean. It was cheaper than transporting them home. Others were flown to storage facilities in the southwestern United States, where they sat in long rows under the desert sun, awaiting disposal. But the Hellcat's service wasn't finished. Reserve squadrons retained F6Fs through the late 1940s. The Navy used them for training, giving new pilots experience in high-performance piston fighters before transitioning to jets. Some were converted to drones for weapons testing, their final missions being deliberately destroyed in missile and anti-aircraft gun trials. Foreign nations acquired surplus Hellcats. France received several squadrons for use in Indochina, where they flew ground attack missions against Viet Minh forces. Argentina operated Hellcats into the 1960s, making them among the last piston-engine fighters in frontline service anywhere. Uruguay, Paraguay, and several other nations used Hellcats for air defense and training. The British Fleet Air Arm, which had operated over 1,200 Hellcats during the war, quickly retired them with the arrival of jet fighters. Some went to training units, others to target towing duties, but most were scrapped by 1950. A few were preserved as instructional airframes for aircraft mechanics. Civilian acquisition began in the late 1940s. Surplus Hellcats sold for as little as $1,500, less than they cost to build. Some became racers, modified for speed competitions. Others were used for aerial surveying, crop dusting, or as personal sport aircraft. The rugged construction that kept pilots alive in combat made them ideal for demanding civilian operations. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. The Hellcat's legacy extended beyond its combat record to influence post-war naval aviation development. The lessons learned from Hellcat operations, the importance of pilot protection, heavy armament, reliability, and ease of carrier operations, influenced every subsequent carrier fighter. The F6F Bearcat, designed as the Hellcat's successor, incorporated these principles. The F9F Panther, the Navy's first successful carrier jet, reflected Grumman's design philosophy established with the Hellcat. Even modern carrier aircraft owe debts to lessons learned from the F6F. The Korean War briefly saw Hellcats return to combat. Reserve squadrons flying F6F-5 flew night interdiction missions during 1950-51, attacking North Korean supply lines under cover of darkness. These were among the final combat operations for piston-engine carrier fighters. Jets were taking over. Today, remarkably few Hellcats survive. Of the 12,275 built, fewer than 50 exist in any condition. Perhaps a dozen are airworthy, maintained by museums and private collectors who recognize the Hellcat's historical significance. These flying examples appear at airshows, their Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines producing that distinctive roar that once meant salvation to American sailors under attack. The finest examples reside in museums worldwide. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, displays multiple Hellcats, including McCampbell's aircraft with 34 victory markings. The Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum preserves an F6F-3 in pristine condition. The USS Midway Museum in San Diego displays a Hellcat on its flight deck, allowing visitors to see how these fighters operated from carrier decks. Several Hellcats have been recovered from crash sites, some from Pacific Islands where they crashed during the war, others from the ocean floor where they sank after pilot bailouts. Each recovery and restoration represents a connection to history, preserving the legacy of the aircraft and the men who flew them. The Commemorative Air Force and other warbird organizations maintain flying Hellcats, ensuring future generations can experience the sight and sound of these historic aircraft. When a Hellcat flies over an airshow, veterans who flew them often attend, sharing stories with younger audiences who never knew the desperate years when American forces fought for survival in the Pacific. Looking back, the F6F Hellcat was more than just a machine. It was the weapon that broke Japanese naval aviation and enabled American victory in the Pacific. Looking back, the F6F Hellcat was more than just a machine. It was the pivotal weapon that transformed American fortunes in the Pacific and proved that industrial capacity combined with sound engineering could overwhelm even the most skilled opponents. The impact on World War II was decisive and measurable. Before the Hellcat's introduction in August 1943, American carrier forces fought defensively, unable to guarantee air superiority in contested waters. After the Hellcat's introduction, American carriers operated with impunity, projecting power across thousands of miles of ocean. The island-hopping campaign that recaptured the Pacific was possible only because Hellcats provided absolute air superiority over invasion beaches. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, exemplified this transformation. In a single day, Hellcats destroyed over 300 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 30. This 10-1 exchange ratio wasn't a fortunate accident. It was the norm for Hellcat operations throughout 1944-45. The 19-1 overall kill ratio remains unmatched in aviation history. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The Hellcat's psychological impact was equally significant. Japanese pilots who dominated Pacific skies in 1942 found themselves hunted by an opponent they couldn't defeat. The confidence and aggressiveness of American pilots soared when they knew their aircraft was superior. This psychological advantage compounded the technical superiority, creating a spiral of American dominance and Japanese desperation. The technological innovations the Hellcat represented influenced naval aviation for decades. The design philosophy prioritized pilot survivability, reliability, and carrier suitability over maximum performance became doctrine for American naval fighters. The F-8F Bearcat, F-9F Panther, and even modern Super Hornets reflect lessons learned from the Hellcat. Rugged construction, heavy armament, and forgiving handling matter more than marginal performance advantages. The Hellcat proved that speed to deployment could win wars. From first flight in June 1942 to combat operations in August 1943, just 14 months, Grumman delivered a war-winning aircraft. This rapid development, enabled by focused requirements and efficient engineering, became a model for future crash programs. The Hellcat showed that urgency and quality weren't mutually exclusive when engineering was sound. Most significantly, the Hellcat demonstrated American industrial supremacy. Japan, despite producing excellent aircraft like the Zero, couldn't match American production rates. Grumman built over 12,000 Hellcats in 3 years. American pilot training programs produced thousands of qualified aviators. American carriers, aircraft, and pilots flooded the Pacific in numbers Japan couldn't counter. The Hellcat was both symbol and instrument of this overwhelming material advantage. The influence on future aircraft design extended beyond naval aviation. The importance of pilot protection, armor, self-sealing tanks, redundant systems became universal. The value of heavy, reliable firepower over lighter, more numerous weapons was established. The principle that aircraft must be maintainable in field conditions by average mechanics became design requirements. Every modern military aircraft owes debts to lessons learned from the Hellcat. Why is it remembered today? Because it did exactly what it was designed to do, turn the tide. In the desperate summer of 1942, American forces needed a weapon to reverse Japanese air superiority. The Hellcat provided that weapon. Every subsequent American victory in the Pacific, the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, was enabled by the air superiority the Hellcat established and maintained. The final statistics summarize its achievement. 12,275, built in less than 3 years. 66,000 plus combat sorties flown. 5,430, 2 enemy aircraft destroyed. 19-1 kill ratio, highest in history. 0 fleet carriers lost to enemy action, while Hellcats provided air cover after 1943. The Hellcat remains the most successful naval fighter ever built. No other aircraft dominated its opponents so completely. No other aircraft so decisively turned the tide of a major theater. No other aircraft so perfectly matched the strategic needs of its time. Veterans who flew it remember not just the victories, but the confidence it gave them. Lieutenant Commander Alex Vrasiu, who shot down 19 aircraft in Hellcats, said in a post-war interview, "The Hellcat was the right airplane at the right time. It wasn't the fastest or the most maneuverable, but it did everything well enough, and it was incredibly tough. When you flew a Hellcat, you knew you had the advantage. That confidence was as important as the performance. So there you have it, the complete story of the F6F Hellcat. From its urgent development in 1942 to the overwhelming victories of 1944-45, this aircraft proved that one plane really could turn the tide of war. 12,275 were built, flying over 66,000 combat sorties, and achieving 5,432 confirmed kills with a 19:1 kill ratio, the highest in aviation history. It remains the most successful carrier fighter ever built, and the weapon that broke Japanese naval aviation permanently. What impressed you most about the Hellcat? The incredible kill ratio, the rapid development, or the fact that it enabled the entire American victory strategy in the Pacific? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into WW2's greatest aircraft, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're covering every legendary warbird from the greatest conflict in history. Thanks for watching WW2 Aviation, and I'll see you in the next one.